Adriana, can we do a roll call?
Yes, and just so you all know, this meeting is being recorded. Eric Davis.
Here.
Tyler Denham.
Here.
Karen Flores.
Here.
Sandy Flores.
I'm here.
Jackie Kellogg.
Here.
Devonna McLaughlin.
Here.
Moses Milazzo. Adria Parafinick. Rebecca Pierce.
Here.
Ross Schaefer. Glenn Slivers. John Slauson. Haley Zaroya.
Here.
Great.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here today. A few housekeeping reminders to start. As Adriana said, this meeting is being recorded. Please avoid using the chat box for general chatter. Instead, enter a C or Q if you have a comment or question during the meeting. Also, please keep yourselves muted if you're not speaking to avoid audio issues. And finally, if you need to leave the meeting early, let us know so that we can note the time for the meeting. And with that, do I have any volunteers to read the land acknowledgement?
Tyler, I just want to acknowledge that our mayor is here as well. So welcome, Mayor. And okay.
Do I have any volunteers to read the land acknowledgement?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Jackie. Go ahead.
The Housing Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to the indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'll now open the meeting up to public comment. Adriana, is anyone queued up for public comment, or did we receive any public comment by email?
We did. We have Chris Rohde here to provide public comment.
Nice. So Chris, before speaking, please note that due to open meeting laws, the commission cannot discuss or act on items presented during this portion of the agenda. And if anyone wants to address the commission on an item that is on the agenda, you just have to wait for the call for public comment at the time the item is heard. And before you give your public comment, just state your full name. Yeah, feel free.
Thank you so much. For the record, Chris Rohde, a management analyst with the City Clerk's Office in Public Affairs for the City of Flagstaff. I am just giving a short comment today to note that we're doing outreach currently for a refresh of our priority-based budgeting objectives and priorities. You may have been forwarded an email on this a few weeks ago. This is the system that we use to evaluate budget requests, and we score those requests against the priorities and objectives, which are supposed to be the biggest, excuse me, supposed to embody the needs and wants of the community, so that as we get requests for more funds, we can best allocate those funds to the types of programs that do the most for those kinds of priorities and objectives. That survey is open until next Friday. It can be reached in the email that was sent out, as well as on the PB website of the city, which is flagstaff.az.gov/3258/priority-based budgeting. If you type in Flagstaff priority-based budgeting, it's the first tab that usually comes up on your Google browser. And again, we'd love to get any responses from you or anyone else that you know in the community that wants to provide feedback. That will allow us to put together a robust set of priorities and objectives for council when we go back to them after the summer break. Thank you for the time. That's all I have.
Tyler, you're muted in case you weren't aware.
Mute button strikes again. Yeah, moving on then to agenda item 5A for the consideration of approval of minutes for the commission meeting on May 25th. I will entertain a motion if someone has one.
I'll move to approve the minutes. This is Haley Soroya.
Thank you. So that was moved by Haley. Do we have a second?
I'll second. This is Sandy Flores.
All right, movement by Haley and a second by Sandy. Is there any discussion on the minutes? If no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries and the minutes are approved. Now, there are no action and discussion items today, so we go straight to general business with agenda item 7A, an informational update on the Flagstaff Regional Plan 2045. I believe Sarah Dechter, the Comprehensive Neighborhood Planning Manager, and Jordan Hollinger, an Associate Planner, will jointly present the update. So feel free to take the ball. And Adriana, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, I see some members of the public here at this meeting today, and I just wanted to make sure that there were no other public comments to be provided before we move on to agenda items. Sorry, Sarah, to just kind of barge in.
Go right ahead.
I don't know if it's appropriate, but I wouldn't mind using some of that free time.
Eric, was that you?
Yeah,
Is this your request to provide public comment?
if that's okay.
Tyler?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I'm not sure on if there's a specific procedure, but in principle, no. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, and my apologies, not just quite aware of the processes of being able to put in a public comment or request one ahead of time. This is my first meeting with the Housing Commission, so greatly appreciate it. Tyler, if you're okay, I just wanted to give a quick overview as to what Habitat is doing for Flagstaff. So real quick, because I know all of you are volunteering your time and I greatly appreciate that effort. Just letting you know that Habitat for Humanity is in the middle of their second starter home construction. We're excited to try and finish this home by the end of September and then sell it right after that to a low-income family earning less than 80% average median income. As many of you may have heard, our starter home program is the revolution in affordable housing and workforce housing when it comes to home ownership. What we're able to do now with this program is it's just a $1,000 down payment and you own a home in Flagstaff. That's it. No first, no last, no pet deposit. After that, we sold our first home to Tucker Usher and his daughter. And I can give you their exact numbers. Their total mortgage payments with all impounds is just $939 a month, of which $833 is going into their equity savings. So their home is actually only costing them $103 a month, if you think about it. And Tucker has been in the house with his daughter for the last 6 months, which means that savings has now grown to $5,000 in just that short period of time. And as many of you know, the way that our methodology works is that the $833 times 12 months is a $10,000 equity savings every year. And Tucker has the opportunity to, am I all done? Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, and so Tucker has the opportunity to sell his home, but only to Habitat. It is deed restricted, so we can resell that home to another low-income family to start a savings mechanism for them as well. But if Tucker owns a home for 3 years, we're going to write him a check for $30,000, 5 years, $50,000. 10 years is the maximum time frame to own a starter home, but you will receive a $100,000 check with that. And then, of course, we'll be working with all of our starter homeowners on post-education classes and just learning what they want to do with their new found wealth when they graduate out of their starter home. We are putting in site plans right now with the city of Flagstaff for a 40-home starter home neighborhood at the Timber Sky master plan. And we're hoping that we'll be able to break ground on that development probably near the new year, and then start building homes about a year from now. And that's what I have to share with everybody. I want to thank everybody again for their time, their support, and their passion for housing.
Yeah, thank you for the public comment, Eric. Adriana, can we open up to any other members of the public that want to give public comment? And I do apologize for skipping over that earlier. I did not notice that there were members of the public in the chat.
I'm going to leave it up to any members of the public that would like to provide public comment. Just opening it up last call. I haven't heard anything from anybody else.
Okay. I'll give a few seconds. All right. In that case, are we good to move on to agenda item 7A, the regional plan update, the presentation with Sarah Dechter and Jordan Hollinger? All right, yeah, Sarah, Jordan, feel free to take over and begin your presentation.
All right, can everyone see my presentation screen well?
Yes.
Great. So Jordan unfortunately was not able to be here with me today, but we've been trading off doing these presentations with the boards and commissions about the city and Coconino County. And the reason for that is we were meeting with folks last summer in all these same commissions, and we were doing, if you'll remember, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats assessment. So this presentation is an update to bring you up to speed on what we've been doing for the last year and to prepare everyone for fall workshops that are going to be essential and really important for setting up a successful update to the Flagstaff Regional Plan. So, if I can get things to advance. If you've been on the commission, you've probably seen this graphic before, and if you're newer to it, then I'll walk you quickly through how we are approaching our regional plan update. The regional plan is the general plan for the city of Flagstaff and an area plan for Donny Park, Belmont, Kachina Village, Mountain Air, and Fernwood, Fort Valley, and all the surrounding neighborhoods that are within a very short commuting distance of Flagstaff. We are in phase 2, and in the latter part of phase 2, associated with bringing this plan that was originally adopted in 2014 and forecasted up to 2030 up to date so that we can adopt it in 2025 and get another 20 years of projection work out of it. And we really are in this portion of the process where we're looking at our projections. Thank goodness we finally have accurate projections and full census data to be looking at in association with what we're doing now. So the process that's underway right now is called scenario planning. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about what we've done to get ready for scenario planning, what's happening in it, and what's ahead, because we're kind of in the very middle of that process. But after we talk about scenario planning, there's also the work of actually writing the plan. We've been picking at bits and pieces of it and collecting information to really help start writing the plan. This fall is when I'm really sitting behind the keyboard and typing the words that we've been listening to and reflecting back, and they start to form up the plan itself. So we would just kind of want to go over that with all the commissions so that we can talk about what it means, where you want to be involved, and hopefully encourage you to come and invite others to the fall workshops. So last fall, it says 2023, but it was really 2022. So there's an error on this slide. We had visioning workshops at 11 locations throughout the community, in the county, and in the city. And we had about 150 participants. These workshops were largely focused on values and goal setting based discussions. So things like, how do you see the future of Flagstaff? What questions are important for us to ask as we work through updating the regional plan? What kind of vision statement would you want to write for Flagstaff and the surrounding communities? So those kinds of input came in. We also at this time launched some outreach to who didn't show up at the first 10 meetings. So every round of programmatic work that we are doing in the community, we follow up with an assessment of who is here and who is missing. And we keep trying to build on that constituency working with us on the plan. So this first round last fall, what we heard was that the natural and built environment, there's kind of more information about how people feel about it. There's lots of support for natural resource and open space protection, also lots of support for preserving the character and historic resources in the community. At the same time, biking, walking, and transit are very competitive options, and people want them to be more competitive in getting around town. We heard a lot about the range of housing that's needed in the community and affordability, not only in the city, but also the rising prices in the neighborhoods like Donny Park and Ford Valley and surrounding areas that were previously more affordable. The last piece here, and one of the most important, was there's really broad support to having the regional plan meet the needs of a large swath of the community, and to especially be doing particular outreach with populations that have been underrepresented in planning discussions in the last 10, 20 years and longer. So we took those lessons from the first round and we started scenario planning with those lessons intact. Before we dive into what scenario planning is, I kind of want to talk about the back of house here with the process. We are using a piece of software called Urban Footprint, and anyone who is as nerdy as me and wants to go find this software and understand what it does, you can go to the website and there's lots of FAQs on how the software works. It's a pretty well calibrated software to the Western United States. It's really designed for sketch modeling. What comes out of the software will also have some additional analysis that we're going to do locally, but we're able to tweak a lot of things within this that really are Flagstaff particular in a way that helps the model really reflect what we think could be accurate enough predictions for us to make some clear policy choices about our land use patterns and type of growth we might want to be encouraging or discouraging when we write the next regional plan. So we're in this scenario planning process, and you can see there's a couple steps. We built a base scenario, and I'll talk about that, and then we've been working on, in these last groups of workshops, describing scenario themes and starting to draft what scenarios look like. There is a technical advisory group meeting on Tuesday, and that group will start looking at how those themes and growth ideas come together, and that's what's going to go into the software I just made. So we're actually closer to this spot on the map. We're like right in front of it than when I started doing these presentations. And then up ahead is really scenario choosing, where the community again gets gathered into workshops, and we talk about the trade-offs between different kinds of approaches that we could have to development patterns in the community. And then finally, a preferred scenario is endorsed, and that is the basis for the work that gets started on actually writing the plan. Is we've got to kind of know what direction we're going and why. Scenario planning is really interesting because it can bring a lot of diverse stakeholders together. It is a data-driven process, but it is also a people-driven process, and the public engagement, not only in open workshops, but also people who are experts in a number of things in the community, to work with staff and have a back and forth with us as we do this work. So we didn't just go out and take the public's information and plug it right into the model. It's been through several rounds of checking and reflecting and understanding with this group of individuals, including the chair and Devonna McLaughlin from this commission, and providing that feedback to us to make sure we're really kind of, as we're working through this material, there's less bias in the process because we are bringing multiple perspectives to it and not just ones that all work within the city or the county. These meetings are recorded. They're just a Zoom meeting, and so we don't stream them, but they are asynchronously posted to our website, and people can watch them, and there's always a comment form online for them as well. So the TAG's been meeting since about February, and they helped us inform some of the key pieces that get us into the workshops that we had in March. Participation at the workshops was almost double what we had in the fall, and that's a trend I like as the project manager, is to see that the numbers are increasing in terms of who wants to be involved. Hearing at the first one that diversity, equity, and inclusion were very important, we also went out and included 10 community-based organizations that really have relationships with the kind of people who we heard it was important are included, but who are not likely to show up on their own to the public meeting. And they get a small stipend to help them do outreach, provide food, conduct their own meetings. So for instance, we held our first fully Spanish speaking workshop with this gamified public engagement that we did. And it included people who, and we actually had to have our translator there to translate from Spanish to English for staff and the people who came to the meeting who were not Spanish speakers. That was hosted by the Northern Arizona Interfaith Council, which has very meaningful relationships with the Spanish speaking community in Flagstaff, and encouraged about a dozen households to come and participate. And we heard very different things about their housing needs and their concerns and what they see in the community than we did at any other workshop. So community-based organizations are really critical in helping us expand what we're able to do in terms of the diversity of participation here. So through this, we collected about 60 maps. And then those maps were turned into data by both my very busy interns, who I appreciate to the ends of the earth, and our consultants. So the interns took every chip people put on the board in this gamified engagement, and they created digitized versions of that we sent to the consultant. They also created a set of discussion notes. So anything that was written on the map, anything that was written on kind of the note-taking sheet, every table had a note taker, was then, treated to a good qualitative analysis process and shared back. So what we're able to present on the ideas that came out of it are not just like, here's people's ideas, but here's how having a low infrastructure budget or a high concern about housing affordability changed the way people made decisions when they were playing our gamified workshop. And that's actually really critical, because we're not just trying to build everyone's ideal Flagstaff when we write this regional plan. We're trying to create the most resilient Flagstaff, and the one that can take all of those things that make us turn how we would make decisions a little bit into account better. So that's kind of why these two pieces of data are important and how we move them forward. So the big themes are not a surprise. This is a pretty high level exercise. So people weren't getting into details about landscaping or urban design. Those are sort of for a later part of the process. We're trying to get a bigger sketch idea first. But generally, there's still a lot of support for mixed use development. In fact, a lot of people took their commercial chips in this game and placed them close to them. I want more amenities. I want more services for my neighborhood. What we know is those go with rooftops, but there's a little more of a mixed feedback on how much density people are comfortable with and how it's organized with amenities and services. But overall, the concept of activity centers still holds pretty strong. And that's one of the central concepts of our current plan that we're probably going to be able to keep working forward with. From transportation standpoint, there wasn't a lot of bike ped opportunities in the game, but there was a pretty even mix of people who really wanted to focus on transit and other people who really wanted a focus on road connectivity being increased, and people got a chance to spend a budget. Land protection was also a key area. Lots of people took a green pen at this game and they colored in areas that they thought we should be avoiding growth and disturbance. And you could see from the previous map that there were some pretty well-known natural resource areas in our community that rose to the top there. And I don't think anyone who knows natural resources in Flagstaff would feel surprised by that pattern. And there's one of the key things to note for this group is another thing is we did not necessarily have affordable housing programming in the budget that people could play with this game, but several tables, and probably on average about one table per event. So probably 5 or 6 total, or maybe, yeah, actually a few more than that. So maybe like 10 total out of that 60 actually created a category for affordable housing, even though they were not prompted to, and started putting budget in it, even though it didn't affect the rest of their gameplay. So that's the kind of thing that was really interesting to observe. We sort of gave people rules, but we also let them break rules to see how that influenced what they were thinking and how they would approach decisions. So now we have about 6 big growth ideas, and these are big ideas, not very detailed. We've also cross-referenced them with a survey that we did in May on policy prioritization, where we asked folks to look at 23 kind of policy ideas and tell us from 1 to 23 how they would rank them. And so those two things are kind of coming together. And what the technical advisory group will do next week is look at how to take these growth ideas and to organize them in scenarios. They're right now, I always say they're a little written like they're talking to a computer, like we're saying, hey, Google, create a city that does X, because we are writing them in a way that inputs them into the model. Whatever we get out of the model has a lot more narrative to it. Like we definitely describe it in a way that is more people-centric. But this is kind of that part where we're working with the software and the computer and trying to see if we can produce some reasonable ideas about what could be different in the future for our community. We already have kind of started calibrating this software by creating what we called a business as usual scenario. So one of our 4 scenarios is going to be, what if we just kept doing what we're doing? We don't make any big major zoning changes anymore. We just keep kind of riding on the zoning code we have and the patterns that the market have been producing for the last 20 years, just keep playing out. And what I can tell you is that is kind of meant to test some assumptions that I think a lot of people come to this process with. They usually come with the assumption that if what we've been doing has been successful, that continuing to do it will continue to be successful. And that is, a bias that I think we all start some of these processes with. However, what the business as usual scenario does show is there's some pretty negative consequences for continuing to do things just like we've been doing them. One, housing affordability plummets, and we see the average single family home go up to almost $1 million in our region by 2045. The commuting shed of the community grows much, much larger. And we see that over 50% of our workforce starts commuting from outside the region, which includes areas like Camp Verde, Tuba City, Winslow, and Williams, which almost doubles the vehicle miles traveled for our work commuting population, which also moves us very far away from our carbon neutrality goals. So those are really challenging findings of our business as usual scenario, that we can't just keep doing things the way we've been doing and expect Flagstaff to meet some of our bigger community objectives, or the region as a whole. And so that is the starting point for building other scenarios and trying to make them robust enough that they move us in a different direction. One possible outcome, I will say, from having scenario planning is we could find that our growth is not fast enough for land use patterns to be the right tool to make these changes. Sometimes when you read climate change or housing affordability research, they say land use is the way to go, but you actually have to have enough growth to make land use a useful lever. And so we might find that that's not the case. And so these are all things I don't know the answer to today, but why we're doing this process and what we'll be looking both to the TAG and the public to help us evaluate as we start working through the next phase of the software work associated with this. So our summer updates have been going on since about the beginning of June. We've had our public survey, we've had a TAG meeting in June, we have done a public webinar and an open house, and we actually did an additional meeting in July with the Sunnyside, Southside, and Plaza Vieja neighborhoods, and met with them as neighborhood associations and talked particularly about the needs of our Title VI neighborhoods in Flagstaff and what they think of our growth ideas and policy prioritization. A lot of them had missed the window for the survey. And so, for instance, when they looked at the public survey results, they said, actually, that doesn't reflect how we feel about those as priorities. And we had a really great discussion about that. So once we close the survey, it's not done. We actually are still looking for feedback. It's not a final answer. So the tag is meeting on Tuesday, and then we get to work behind the scenes and we go quiet for about 2 months probably to get all our ducks lined up and bring out something that the scenarios can meaningfully be commented on by the public. So the last thing I want to talk about with you is getting ready for a regional plan committee to be appointed. And I actually sent today the nominations that came from our elected officials at the city and the county for members of this committee to the city and county manager. So the first thing in actual committee, and I usually make the distinction that the tag was our technical advisory group. They were looking at how we were doing the back end work very closely and helping keep us on track. The committee is actually our policy making body. So they are the sounding board. They're going to be helping write and review and make iterations of the plan that we develop. So their first step is to be part of this scenario choosing. So I'll get them all caught up just like I did you all today. And then they're going to come into this process as well and help identify the preferred scenario based on the kind of public feedback that we have. This committee is going to be about 20 members of the public. It's appointed by our city and county manager. They now have a list of nominations. The supervisors and city council members provided about 34 nominations, and we reached out to all of those people and got letters of interest from them with a little more detail so the city and county manager can really look at how representation, both geographically and by subject matter area, is represented within the committee. And the process is going to be that first meeting. They are not a commission and they are not a subcommittee of a commission. So they are not going to be following the board and commission manual of the city of Flagstaff verbatim. We are going to have them set up formal rules for how they're going to operate that include procedures to make sure the meetings are advertised and posted, that they're available to the public, how public comment will happen in those meetings. And they may choose some pretty flexible ways that you all, as being familiar with the board and commission manual, might be a little harder. They might run workshops, they might run listening sessions, they might have less formal settings and not be behind a dais. And they're going to get a chance to weigh in on how all of that will go forward and set that up at the beginning. So their process on how we will actually work with them to create a plan is first, they got to decide how are they going to work? How are we going to work together? How is the schedule going to be set? And they'll have to identify a framework. So like our current framework for the regional plan is we have area types, which are like urban, suburban, rural, employment, and special districts. And we have place types, which are corridors, activity centers, and neighborhoods. Do we like those? Do we want to make changes to it? Is there something we've learned? Do we want to reevaluate? They'll take a look at some of those integral pieces and talk about them a little bit. And then we'll start working from the preferred scenario, with the preferred scenario to start kind of pulling some of that early work together. Then we'll create all the other goals and policies that support that central land use piece and keep refining it as we go. And when we've kind of got enough of that information to have a strong core, staff will start preparing chapters of the plan and we'll submit those through a review process that we're still outlining to the committee for review and endorsement. And then finally, the committee will get to see a whole document and then endorse it as the draft plan. And there may be other workshops and public engagement opportunities along the way during this process. It's pretty flexible and we will be working with the committee to decide how we proceed through this period of time. But ultimately, when we're done with all of that, there's at least a 60-day public review of the whole plan where we advertise and we tell everybody, look at it. This is the chance before we go to public hearings to make comments. And without a doubt, we'll be back at all the boards and commissions during those 60 days. So that's what I have to present right now. And let me stop sharing my screen. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you have questions after, of course, you can reach out to me or Jordan about how we're doing this work or what we can do to make sure the Housing Commission's concerns are represented.
I'll go ahead and open with a question, Sarah, centered on equity and inclusion. I'm curious if you're doing anything to track the number of renters versus homeowners that are engaging in the process. And I asked specifically about that group because, as our housing plan shows, there's pretty big disparities in housing that fall along the line of renters versus homeowners. And I know from a lot of political science research that renters tend to be underrepresented at these kinds of public engagement events. So I'm just curious if that's something you guys are keeping an eye on or plan to track at any point.
Well, one of the ways we are approaching that is if this were a zoning case, for instance, the notification requirement is to tell the property owners that there's a zoning request. And but what we're actually doing when we send a mailing, and we're sending about one mailing a year, is we're using every door direct mail so that it actually ends up in apartment mailboxes. So we are making sure that that kind of thing gets to people living in apartments in the community. Because remember, the ultimate decision makers on the regional plan is registered voters, because we send it to the ballot. It's the only thing besides the city charter that has to go to the ballot for approval. And so we do kind of have a mindset of that. We've not been tracking it very specifically yet because we've been careful about the kind of demographic questions we've been asking, because we got feedback from our community-based organizations. Some of them were like, you should do a lot of tracking of the demographics of participants, and others felt that would discourage participation. So we've been going back and forth on it a little. I think for scenario choosing, there is going to actually be like a tell us about yourself form that I ask everybody to fill out. That seems like a pretty important step, because if we are at a point of choosing something and we feel a group is underrepresented, it's probably not actually time to move forward. But we've been a little softer on that in this first part in phase 1 and this first part of phase 2. But the CBOs have brought a lot of people to the table who haven't been part of the conversation before. We've met in a transitional housing setting. We have met with Flag High School students who are living in the Kinlani dormitory or living in rental units in the city. We've had a lot of input from folks at the neighborhood associations, and they often bring along people who are renting and not always the homeowners. So we've tried to kind of build that in, but we're not like tracking it statistically at this point. But there is going to be a point this fall where we're going to start to standardize the demographic data that we're getting from participants from this point forward. My experience in Flagstaff, and I'll be very frank as having done this for 8 years at public meetings, is that people who are already heavily represented in attendance fill out those forms, and the people who are underrepresented walk right by you and never turn them in. So even if you look around the room and diversity was present, forms like that don't actually end up reflecting it when you try and run them as statistics. There's a lot of social psychology reasons that occurs.
Yeah, no, thank you for answering the question. And yeah, it's very interesting. And open it up to other commissioners that have follow-up questions. I'll give a few more seconds for anyone, if they've got a follow-up question, to raise their hand or put a Q in the chat. I see that Eric has his hand raised. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for that presentation. It was fantastic. Quick question. I've been working a lot with the city of Williams, and sounds like they're having some hard times with their septic and looking at doing a housing moratorium. And I'm just wondering how that's affecting your plans.
Right. I think that is going to be a big part of what we have to talk about. We haven't talked to Williams in particular about that, but you did say Williams and not Winslow, right? Did I hear you correctly, Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah. We haven't talked to Williams, but we have been paying attention to what's been going on with Rio Verde foothills and the water situation with Scottsdale. And there is a real classic way of developing, of like spreading out. And one of the growth ideas that we're going to be talking about is what should be done in our rural activity centers, which are not on the city's water system. And what should we do with the urban growth boundary? It's a challenge that there are going to be communities throughout Arizona who are struggling to maintain their water and sewer infrastructure in the next 50 years. And some of those cities will not be successful. There's just not enough resources currently. And with the tax changes we've had recently, it seems very improbable that there will be from the state. The ability to support all of those communities the way that we have in the last century. And that is definitely a thought, because if Flagstaff has, we have a voluntary 100-year water supply designation from ADEQ because we value our water conservations and our water conservation goals as a community, and we've been successful at them since 1987. And even before that, of really meeting those goals. So we're kind of ahead of the curve. But how will that play out when communities near us start running out of water or restricting development because of lack of infrastructure? That will be one of the challenges that we have some real conversations about as we move into the scenarios.
Thanks, Sarah. And my apologies. I thought we were at public participation for the agenda item.
Yeah, I apologize for that. So after the commissioner questions, I'll ask for public comment. And I just saw the name Eric with a hand raised and assumed that was Eric, our commission member. Adriana, is there anything I need to do to acknowledge that that was public comment and not a question from a commissioner, or are we okay?
I think we're good as long as Eric can acknowledge that that was his public comment.
Yeah, which I believe he just did right there.
And so acknowledged.
I think we're good.
Thanks.
Tyler.
Okay, I'll open the floor back up to other commissioners. I'll give 15 seconds if you've got any follow-up questions, and then I'll formally open up for public comment if there are any other members of the public. All right, in that case, if there are any other members of the public that would like to give public comment at this moment, go ahead and raise your hand or put a C in the chat. And I'll give a few more seconds for anyone to do that. All right, Sarah, thank you so much for the presentation. We'll go ahead and move on to agenda item 7B, which is an informational overview of the updated housing section limited English proficiency language access plan, presented by our own Adriana Fisher, housing program manager for City of Flagstaff. Adriana, feel free to take over.
Thank you, Chair. Let me go ahead and pull up my presentation. Okay. So as Tyler said, I'm so sorry, give me 1 second. Here we go, that's much better. Okay. So good afternoon, Housing Commissioners. As Tyler said, my name is Adriana Fisher, your very own Housing Commission Liaison and Housing Program Manager for the Housing Section. I'm here to talk with you about the newly updated Limited English Proficiency Language Access Plan. I know it's kind of a mouthful. I'm going to actually turn off my video so that we can get into the materials. So today we're going to discuss some acronyms. We are going to start with just some acronyms that you'll hear throughout the presentation. We're going to discuss Title 642 USC 2000 of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We're also going to discuss Executive Order 13166, why they matter, and the reasons for updating our existing LEP implementation plan. We will go over key points from the updated language access plan, including a 4-factor analysis and procedures. Then I'd like to finish by telling you about the upcoming public comment period and my requests for you. So as we discussed, let's start off with some acronyms. An LEP is a limited English proficiency. An LAP, I'm just going to call this one a LAP throughout the presentation to avoid any confusion. So this is a language access plan, which is the document that we will be discussing. And CDBG, as you've heard many times before, is a community development block grant. So here's a brief overview of Title 642 USC 2000D of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This code essentially protects those who benefit from federal or federally funded programs or activities from being discriminated against based on their race, color, or national origin. To ensure Title 642 USC of the 1964 Civil Rights Act is to enforce the Title 642 USC 2000D of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the President signed Executive Order 13166 on August 11th of 2000. The order clarifies the responsibilities of federal agencies who receive federal funds. It requires such agencies to develop their own plans to give LEP persons meaningful access to their programs and activities. To do this, agencies must follow a guidance document by the Department of Justice, which includes compliance standards. Compliance should not overburden an agency or their programs or activities. Lastly, each LEP plan is required to be reviewed by the agency's stakeholders. So why are we taking the time to update the LEP implementation plan now? Well, our current LEP implementation plan was last updated in 2010. Things have changed significantly in our community and the demographic it serves in the past 13 years. Additionally, this task is listed as a strategy in the 10-year housing plan as Protect 3.2, which requires us to examine and update, if needed, the City of Flagstaff's Housing Limited English Proficiency Plan. The 10-year housing plan emphasizes the need to focus on equity and inclusion, and that's exactly what this language access plan is achieving. One of the first things you'll notice is that moving forward in my presentation, we changed the name of this document from Implementation Plan to Language Access Plan. The updated Language Access Plan will go into effect in September after a 30-day public comment period. The document was created according to the guidance provided by the Department of Justice, which was referenced in Executive Order 13166. So go ahead and address this 4-factor analysis. The Department of Justice guidance document, sorry, give me just 1 second. Sorry about that. So the Department of Justice's guidance document recommends that each agency conducts a 4-factor analysis to identify the extent and adequacy of assistance of an LEP person will receive. This process is included in the lab. Here's a brief overview of our findings. So factor 1, regarding the number of LEP persons likely to be served by the program, U.S. Census Bureau data was utilized to determine that 4% of Flagstaff residents speak English less than very well. So, of course, 2.2% of these speak Spanish. This helped us determine that Spanish was the second most prominent language utilized citywide. So Sarah Dector, I loved that you guys had your first Spanish regional plan meeting. I think this definitely is one of the most inclusive ways to include those that speak Spanish. So for factor 2, regarding the frequency of contact with the program, staff analyzed our current housing section programs to determine how often clients would come into contact with our programs. On average, it's appropriate to say 18 to 24 months is about average frequency of contact for the typical client. For community development block grant or CDBG programs, staff typically work with subrecipients who work with beneficiaries. Subrecipients are responsible for having their own language access plan, so we rely on and monitor them to ensure they're in compliance with Executive Order 13166. Factor 3, the importance of the program. This one was easy to answer due to our current housing market and the council declared housing emergency. Lastly, factor 4, regarding resources and cost, the housing section has access to various resources at a minimal cost. Some of those include bilingual staff, community volunteers, which is common at the City of Flagstaff Housing Authority, and an on-demand telephonic interpretation service provided by Sierracom International through contract with the Housing Authority. And of course, we have our day-to-day technology options such as translation apps, Word, Google Translate, and the list goes on. So, as required by Executive Order 13166, the housing section has clear procedures outlined in the new law. We address how to identify LEP persons utilizing a speak cards, an LEP question on applications, and a notice regarding how to request LEP accommodations on documents and advertisements, to name a few. Because we want to make sure we are equitable in everything we do, we have to find some language access measures, such as making sure CDBG subrecipients comply with executive order, in-person clients who go to the City of Flagstaff Housing Authority for public-facing office for services will benefit from their LAP, which was just updated this year right before ours. We will be utilizing bilingual staff. We will be translating vital documents as necessary and utilizing community volunteers as necessary. Typically, this is family and friends, to name some options. The staff training portion of the lab provides a nice list of everything staff will be trained on, such as everything that has been discussed in this presentation, plus the resources available once an LEP person is identified. It also clearly defines when training will be provided to staff. We want to make sure every staff person knows about and utilizes this information. So the next section regarding providing notice to LEP persons defines how the housing section will provide notice to LEP persons regarding the language services available to them. Monitoring and updating the LEP policy is the next section. This section is where we indicate how we will better monitor LEP persons and triggering events for updating the LEP person. In this section, for accountability, we name a language access plan coordinator, which happens to be me. You'll see in a later slide. Lastly, a complaint procedure is outlined in the last section, including contact information for myself and our assistant housing director, Justina Costa, should there be a complaint, suggestions, or comments about the lab. Last but not least, staff will be holding a 30-day comment period from August 1st through the 30th to allow stakeholders to provide their input on the updated language access plan. Public comment notices will be sent to various stakeholders in the next few days. Please watch for this announcement so you can help disperse the information throughout the community and provide comments if you choose to. And with that very short presentation, I hope that you are able to help disperse the information throughout the community. And thank you so much for your time. I am open to any questions that you may have.
Yeah, so any members of the commission that have a question, follow-up questions for Adriana, just raise your hand or put a C or Q in the chat.
know it kind of zoomed through it kind of quickly.
And I'm not seeing any hands or cues in the chat, so I'll throw my own question. I just want to verify my own understanding. So this is basically a plan for making these materials more easily accessible to people who have limited English proficiency, right?
Exactly. So here at the housing section, we don't get a whole lot of traffic when it comes to in person. The Housing Authority is our front-facing office. But if we were to get a call from somebody that only speaks Spanish or speaks a language other than Spanish, we want to have something that is in place to where employees know exactly who to run to and what resources we have available.
Okay, understood. And I'm still not seeing any hands raised or cues in the chat from other commissioners. So I'll go ahead and open up for public comment. Any member of the public who is on the call, you can raise your hand or put a cue in the chat and I'll call on you. And I'll give a moment for that. All right, not seeing any public comments. So Adriana, thank you so much for the presentation. And we'll move on to informational items, starting with agenda item 8A, an update from the Housing Authority Commission member. Now, typically that would be Moses, but I don't believe he's on the call, right, Adriana? So do we have a member of the city staff that can give that update instead?
We do. Sorry about that. Wasn't quite ready. I didn't realize Moses wasn't here. Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Sarah Dyer. I'm the Housing Director, with the pleasure of overseeing both the team that you regularly interact with, as well as the Housing Authority. Housing Authority Board meeting was just last week, and we covered the 5-year capital plan, which is a rolling 5-year capital plan that we turn into HUD every year, with the most recent year falling off and year 5 being added on. Reviewed our capital needs for our public housing units, which then the board approved the 5-year capital plan and the acceptance of the capital funding for the coming year. We had some staff overview and updates. And our next meeting will be the third Wednesday of August. So that was a quick overview of what Housing Authority Board did this month.
Yeah, thank you so much for jumping in with that update in Moses' stead. Are there any, sorry. In that case, we'll move on to agenda item 8B, which is updates from housing commissioners and other informational items. So do any members of the Housing Commission have an update, an informational item they'd like to discuss? All right. Oh, I see Adriana, you have your hand raised.
I just want to remind the commission that this is a part where if you have something that you'd like to learn about or a request to staff on something that, again, you don't fully understand and maybe you want to talk about it at a future meeting, this is also the place to do it.
Gotcha. With that prompting, Adriana, I do actually have a question I can throw out there. So I recently attended one of the regional plan workshops. It was members of the Southside Community Association and the Sunnyside Community Association that were there. And the conversation revolved almost entirely about displacement concerns. So those neighborhood associations are worried about long-term residents being forced out of those neighborhoods. And one thing that struck me is that there's actually a fair amount of academic research on displacements, on the type of development patterns, the type of land use patterns that tend to lead to displacement of residents. But members of the public and members of the associations aren't super aware of that stuff, and I wouldn't expect them to be either. You know, it's very dense academic work. But is that something that the Housing Commission could potentially help with? Is there like an addendum to the housing plan or some other material we could put out there specifically centering on, you know, kind of a plain language overview of what academic research says about displacement?
That's a very great question. I think I'm going to use my resources and see if Justina or Sarah have any input on this. And also, I don't think we can't really get into it, but that is something that we may be able to address at a future meeting.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
I'll take a quick shot at it. There are a few strategies within the 10-year housing plan, one of them being I don't remember what the specific term in the plan is, but an additional piece for developers to fill out, which is essentially would help us keep track of any displacement, be able to talk about units gained and lost. We can do some, if you're happy to share the academic research you're looking at, because we have some, but we may not be talking about the same thing. It is something that we could educate the commission on so that both staff and commission are comfortable with discussing such things in public and or at a minimum referring folks to resources.
Yeah, that would be great. And
it's
I should
probably
also...
not something we can do. Oh, I'm sorry. It's probably not something we can
no.
do by the next meeting, but it is absolutely something we'll put into our working calendar.
Yeah. Oh, and I should also clarify, during the meeting, they were mostly calling this gentrification, but what they were referring to is the phenomena where residents get, you know, forced out of the neighborhood, which in the academic research is specifically called displacement. Gentrification has a whole host of other meanings that are harder to study academically. So yeah, I'll be happy to send the materials that I've personally reviewed over, and yeah, maybe that can be a topic for future commission meeting.
That'd be great. Thank you. We also heard similar things in the 10-year plan surrounding gentrification and displacement. So it is something that we are certainly aware of. It's something that was incorporated into the 10-year plan because of its importance in a growing community. So it's not outside of a scope we would be discussing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll do a quick check before moving on. Any other commission members want to jump in with an update, informational item? Okay, in that case, move on to agenda item 8C, which is updates from the housing staff. And yeah, Adriana, go ahead.
Hello, commissioners. Again, I promise I'll continue to breathe this time. I'm going to go slow. I've got a lot of updates this month during this item, more than usual. And this is just because we added a new component to this item based on some feedback that we received during the commissioner experience survey. And I hope that this helps you just kind of get to know some of the day-to-day successes and updates we have had in the last since we saw you, so 2 months. It will not take up a whole lot of time. It's just that we haven't seen each other for a couple of months, so it may seem like a lot. So with that, let me start with those items, and then we'll move on to current updates. So in the last couple of months, staff attended a collaborative planning meeting with the community development with other community development staff at the Murdoch Center to discuss CDBG-funded Murdoch Neighborhood Park project. The housing section is working with local homeless and social service agencies to provide weekly updates from the Flagstaff Fire Department about potential restrictions and closures. Housing staff mailed correspondence to over 200 homeowners over the past 3 months. It has not been an easy task. To basically ensure that they are still living in their home as a primary residence as a requirement of our programs. The land availability and suitability analysis and code analysis. I know a lot of you may be super curious about that, and at this point it is underway as an independent consultant was hired. We may have a potential meeting in September with one of our other community development members to see how we can get involved. Housing staff participated in a housing focused panel discussion at the Arizona State Bar land use workshop held in Tempe. City of Flagstaff housing staff participated in a roundtable discussion on the issues of affordable housing and homelessness with Governor Katie Hobbs. And staff also attended a red carpet celebration, is what they were calling it, for the opening of Elora at the Sawmill, which was developed by McGrath Partners, and they provided 34 affordable rental units. So thank you, Elora, for that. Staff applied for and was notified that the city was awarded $840,000 in homeless shelter and service funds from the Arizona Department of Housing. And after almost a year of work, we were informed that PNC Bank is now lending option for our City of Flagstaff down payment assistance programs in the Community Land Trust program. And in coming up, the 10-year housing plan overarching goal data progress will be posted within a week or so to include April through June data. So watch for that in the next week. Housing and Public Affairs staff met recently to discuss timeline regarding when we will give the public an update on the Housing and Water Services bond. And then most recently, we are very excited to share that Jen Michelson has been promoted from Housing Analyst to Housing Planning Manager effective July 9th. And with that, Jen, would you like to talk about the new position and the bond rental incentive program update? Just a brief one this month. You're on mute.
Sorry. Sure. I'm assuming you want me to talk about the position I'm hiring for. We do have a new position, basically to replace myself or to assist me in my new role. That title of that position is Housing Planner. It's been advertised for about a week and a half. It's set to close at the end of this week on Friday, the 28th, tomorrow. And we've had a pretty decent response so far with applications, but any further kind of promotion you guys may have, feel free to advertise that. I think it went out in an email. All the housing newsletter recipients received that job, Eric, that job advertisement via email. So if you want to dig around and forward that to anyone you may be thinking of, that would be great. Moving on to our bond-funded rental incentive program. I'm really excited. I'm actually starting to draft the program. 5 housing commissioners formed the working group. Let's see, Jackie, Devonna, Haley, Rebecca, and Sean. Thank you all so much for your participation so far. We've met 3 times throughout June and July. And I felt like we had enough guidance from the group to develop some framework to get some things on paper. So instead of meeting for a 4th time, I canceled that 4th meeting to give me some time to be writing and drafting the program to get something back out to the group for everybody to review, a written document, which I think we were ready to start kind of nitpicking some specifics. So yeah, like I said, I have it open right now on my desktop. I'm drafting it up. I'll be meeting with some staff next week to kind of volley it back and forth, make sure it's hitting all the right bases. And I don't have an exact date to get it out to the working group for their review, but my goal is definitely within like 2 weeks. So that's kind of where we're at. And as a reminder, once we get a good draft, written, that would be ready for the commission. I think the goal was September, October, I think we will need to get a legal review that would be coming your way, Christina. Thank you. It shouldn't be too long, so it shouldn't be a super long review process, but I do want to bring that to the commission for your guys' input and review in the coming months so that we can get that to council for their review and approval. So I think that's everything. Did I miss anything, Justina, Sarah, Adriana? Okay. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I can put my email. Oh, Justina's I'll put my email in the chat just in case people have questions for me, can get in touch with me.
You're on mute again, Tyler. Can I?
Yes, sorry. I see that, yeah, thank you so much for that update. And I see that Christine put a C in the chat earlier, so I'll call on Christine. And then after that, I did see that Justinia raised her hand. So after Christine, Justinia.
So I think actually Adriana covered what I was going to talk about. I was just going to let you guys know about the money we received from the Arizona Department of Housing. So she covered that for us. Thanks, though.
Oh, yeah, in that case, great. Justinia?
I'm totally good. Thank you.
Oh, okay. And Devana, I see that you put a A in the chat.
I meant a Q. I'm so sorry. I'm a dork. I was just wondering, I just want to say congratulations to city staff for getting that allocation of money from the governor's office from the fiscal year 23 budget. I know they gave you like a hot second to get that submitted, and not a lot of communities across the state got awarded. So a lot of it went towards Phoenix with the closure of their homeless encampments and all of that. So to get that much money in Flagstaff is tremendous. So congrats to you all for that hard work. And then the question is timeline, process, any update on what happens next?
Yeah, so I should have just said that because I should have known you were going to ask. The hope is to be back to the Housing Commission at the September meeting to give an overview of our recommendations for allocations of those funds. Of course, that will depend on us being able to get a NOFA out and get a ranking committee assembled really quickly. I'm thinking we can do it. I'm feeling really hopeful. So hopefully I'll have an update in the next week or two as to dates for a notice of funding availability. It'll be a really much more simplified version of our usual application, just because the idea is to get that money out ASAP. So that's the plan. And then hopefully we'll be doing the victim services ARPA funds at the same time, just to be able to utilize our volunteers and our ranking committee really effectively. And just to give a little bit more information about, the funds can be used for operations of programs for that serve homeless individuals, as well as we put in there for motel and hotel vouchers for emergency shelter and move-in assistance as well.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Adriana, I think you've got further updates. Oh, you're on mute.
Every time. Tyler, we're even. So I'm so sorry for all the updates today. Next time, hopefully it won't be so much. I do have a couple more updates, just some things to look forward to, and then I will be done. I will be done, unless other staff has other updates. So I know some of you are going to just kind of roll your eyes a little bit, but the August meeting is canceled for good reason. It seems like all of our pending work is going to fall in September. So we'll talk about coming attractions. The next update is regarding Housing Commission seats. If your seat is expiring, and I already emailed you about it, reference back to that email, because you'll see where you'll see if your term's expiring. If you want to stay on the commission, everybody's eligible for this year to reapply. So be sure to get your applications in. And then September coming attractions. Okay, so September, we will be electing a new chairperson and a vice chairperson. I want to put that information out there right now. Our current chair and vice chair are eligible to serve for another term, but they have to be voted in. So that's also an option. And if that's something that you might want to do, definitely consider it between now and September so that you can throw your name in the hat. When it comes to September attractions, this is subject to change, of course. We have proposed CHAP changes. That's our down payment assistance program, the Community Home Buyer Assistance Program. Christine will be back in September, hopefully, to give us an update about some changes that we are proposing to make that program just slightly better and more helpful in this market. We will be hearing from Christine again that month regarding the recommendation for the Arizona Department of Housing funds, the $800,000+ that we just received. Congrats to Christine. She really put a lot of work into that. And then we may be hearing from the Community Development Department, another manager, regarding the land suitability and regulation analysis project and how the commission can be more involved in that. And then last but not least, there's a potential that we'll be hearing about the bond rental incentive program review so that we can actually make some decisions at that point. And then my last comment is specific to one commissioner. I don't know if anybody else has a seat that's expiring in September and will not be applying or reapplying. But I want to just take a moment to thank Eric Davis for his tenure on the Housing Commission. He has been here from almost the very beginning. He's not reapplying at this time, but we are very fortunate that we got to have him for so long. And I guess at this point, we'll let him do other great things in the community. Thank you, Eric. And I guess if you have any words to say at your very last meeting, you are welcome to it, but I'm not going to call on you or anything. Eric,
no, I just want to say thank you guys for the opportunity. I've learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing the progress the commission makes over the next several years. So just because I'm not here doesn't mean I'm not out there looking and watching and supporting.
Yeah, thank you so much. Best wishes, Eric. And yeah, I think I speak for everyone when I say we greatly appreciate the service that you gave to the Housing Commission.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
All right. Any other updates you want to run through, Adriana, or should I open it up to any other staff members that may have an update?
I'm done. I feel like I've talked a lot today.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing.
I lost my breath there for a minute. If anybody else has any other comments, feel free to do so now. Otherwise, I think we're good.
Okay, yeah. I'll give a few seconds for anyone to raise a hand before I adjourn the meeting. And time it on my watch. All right. In that case, thank you all so much for your time. This meeting is adjourned at 2:20 p.m. Everyone have a good day.
Have a good one.
Thank you all.